Been going through the churches in Revelation. Remember last week we talked about where those came from, what that is. Just a quick reminder. The Apostle John writes the book of Revelation 95 AD-ish, in my opinion. If you don't like that, we can have conversations after. If you don't care, just put that in your brain. Story. Okay. So he writes it then. It's what they call apocalyptic in nature. So there's some weird stuff in it. Everybody knows that, right? Everybody, when Christians take a bad rap, it's always because somebody has taken Revelation and gone off the deep end. Remember, the big point is the book of Revelation was written to people. And so if you get the letter, it needs to be applicable to you, or you would have thought the author was insane, right? So you can't just divorce the whole thing from the churches it's written to. All that to be said, we are not going to go through the full book of Revelation, because once you get past the churches, it gets confusing on which view is right. You can argue a bunch of different views historically and biblically, and so we're just going to go through the churches because I think it's important that we garner the information there for what churches were dealing with when they were around, what Christ commands of them, and so we can then apply that to vintage here. All that to be said then, we covered Ephesus last week. That line is up online if you'd like to see that message, or if you missed that, you can find that on YouTube if you just search Pastor Pat Edrington. This week, we're going to do the letter to Smyrna. So Smyrna is not New Smyrna. Is there a New Smyrna in Florida? I think so. But this is the old Smyrna. And it is in Asia Minor, like the rest of these churches. It's next in the line of postal delivery at the time that this was written. So the Roman postal service would have gone to Ephesus, and then we would have gone to Smyrna. And this letter is all about persecution. It's all about persecution and suffering. And let me tell you about my first world problems that I've had over the past couple days. Friday morning, I woke up, my phone worked fine. I went to work, I took my phone out, and it was just looping through its opening. It just said, "Hi, I'm a Samsung phone," over and over and over until it died. Died completely dead, gone. So then I have to take the phone out to Verizon. I have to stand in line for 4 hours. I have to make brand new friends with all the men in the room who are over the age of 85, who are complaining about why do they have cell phones and why can't I buy a flip phone, and who does texting, you bunch of heathen. If you want to talk to somebody, they should call people. That's why we had telephones. When I was a kid, I would get in my truck and drive to my grandma's house, and we would have coffee and talk face to face. Not anymore. My grandkids just send me text messages. I don't even know how to respond to them, so I don't read them. So they say your phone's under warranty, we can send you a new phone, but it's not going to come until Monday. So here I am, first world. How am I supposed to live in life without a cell phone? I can't text no one. I can't check what you morons are saying on Facebook. And I can't get Facebook on anything else because Facebook has two-factor authentication now. So if you try to put your Facebook on something else, they send a text message to your phone, which I don't have. So I'm just wandering in darkness. That's where I'm at. And then all that, when you put that into perspective, this week then I'm preaching about persecution. And it just made me feel bad about myself for 3 days, because I'm genuinely frustrated about this situation. But then in the context of what I'm preaching and studying, it makes you just feel like such a spoiled, rich, Western American when you put it into the context of what it is we're going to look at. So know that as we run through this morning, I'm preaching to myself just as much as anybody else. All that to say, Smyrna. Let's talk Smyrna. Let's talk about Smyrna before we get into the text. So Smyrna gets its name from myrrh, right? Remember, if any of you know the story, that's right. Any of you know the stories about the birth of Jesus? When the wise men show up, they bring frankincense, or Frankenstein if you're under the age of 10, and myrrh. Myrrh is a spice that you get from breaking certain kinds of rock. It creates this unique smell that was heavily used by the Egyptian in burial rites, which then, because the Egyptians had conquered a lot of the world, was used in a lot of burial rites, which is a little weird when you think about Jesus, that they brought him the stuff that you put on dead bodies as a sign of, hey, you're going to be important. Here's the stuff to put on you when you die. But myrrh comes from Smyrna. So they were an incredibly rich city. They had a lot of money, and a lot of power and a lot of authority because they made all their money off of this spice trade. They also were incredibly liked by Rome. Rome loved the city of Smyrna. Smyrna is the first city to build the temple to Roma, which is the idea that the actual city of Rome had a god. So, which is the concept, which is really weird to think about. The concept of the city was a god that should be worshipped. So they were the first ones outside of Rome to build a temple to that idea. Then within that temple was where emperor worship started. So along the lines in there of, Roman progression, eventually they get to the spot where the emperor is in fact a god and should be worshipped, which causes all kinds of persecution and problems in the New Testament church, because to maintain living and to pay your taxes, you had to go to the emperor's temple in whatever town you lived in and give a sacrifice and pay a small tax and say that he was God. And then if you did that, you were good. Well, you can see why that would create a problem. Now the Jews, they went to the Roman government and said, if you make us do this, we're going to war. Even if you kill all of us, because we're monotheistic, there's only one God. So Rome said, well, that's not worth that fight. Just show up, offer the sacrifice, pay the tax, but you don't have to say he is God. Just say that you respect his leadership. So the Jews had like a caveat built into the system here that they could get around emperor worship. That was predominant in Smyrna. That was what a lot of them did. There's also all the other weird temples to the gods there. The largest theater in Turkey is in Smyrna. So if you look up pictures when you go home, you're like, oh, you can see this giant cut into the side. And then all of these rich mansions are built around the top of it, and it creates what they call the crown. So Smyrna had this thing called the crown that was part of the city. Now, the church that is there, because Rome is run by the tyrant Domitian at the time, they are facing incredible persecution because the leadership in Smyrna loves Rome. They love Rome so much that when Titus came through and he conquers all of those little cities and purges all the Jewish people, burns the temple down, he bypasses Smyrna. He doesn't go there. So that's why there's such this large population of Jewish people who are there. And they don't like the Christians. So that's the city this church is existing in. Incredibly affluent, lots of money, lots of wealth, lots of pagan worship, and then you got this church in the midst of that. So verse 8 in chapter 2 picks up like that. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. Remember last week Jesus did this the same way when he wrote the letter. He references his previous identities that he gives out in the first chapter of Revelation. He's doing the same here. Although this has deeper meaning, we'll come back to that later because I want to cover the letter before we talk about why he chose to be called the first and last and who died and came to life. Picking up then in verse 9, here's the whole letter. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you're rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you'll have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. So let's break it down. I know your tribulations and your poverty. Tribulations here, that word can be translated as affliction. The important thing we know when we're looking at what he's saying is the things they are facing, Jesus is recognizing as these are things that are happening to you, not things you're making happen to yourself. So he's separating this from like you're struggling or suffering because of a sin situation. No, you're struggling and suffering because the world outside of you is doing this thing to you. So he's making that point. And then he says your poverty. Now in Greek, there's two words for poverty. One word is a word that means you just don't have a lot. Right? So you got a little bit of stuff, but not a lot. You probably have a house to live in. Your eager means. That's that word. The other word for poverty means extreme poverty. No roof, no food, don't know how you're going to survive, don't know how you're going to go from day to day, that type of poverty. That's the word that Jesus uses here in this letter to this church. You're not a little poor. I know you are super poor. You're poor in a way that other people don't understand. So the thing that we need to look at and think about is Jesus thinks of poverty as affliction. He thinks of it as punishment. But there's also the next line that says what? But you are rich. So before we go much further, we got to figure out what is Jesus talking about. In the world, poverty has a way of changing things, right? Like the way people who are in poverty see and do things is different than the way normal people see and do things. And if you aren't poor when you deal with people in poverty, sometimes there's friction that starts because you're like, what are you doing? Like, why are you not thinking through? You don't understand because you're not seeing it through the lens of poverty. Poverty changes the way that you approach things and you deal with things because it really is an affliction. It really is tribulation and suffering and struggle. If you don't know, how am I going to feed my kids? How am I going to pay for my power bill? How am I going to pay rent and keep my home? How am I going to... Then that becomes almost an anxiety situation that's all you can process and think about. And in the world we live in, it's an even more of a problem because the economy is a train wreck right now. So there's lots of people in this world that are struggling. Every time, it feels like every 3 months, Amber sends me a letter and goes, hey, we're hiking your power bill, and not a little. We're not breaking it up a little. Get ready. We're going to see how many zeros we can put on the end of this thing, and then you got to pay it. Right? And then you're like, oh no, how am I going to survive? That's that feeling. But imagine that feeling if it's even more than like, oh no, how are we going to make all of this ends meet? And it's like, no, how are we going to survive? How am I going to survive? How am I going to find a place to sleep and live? And in this city, what's going on is the poverty that they have is an affliction because of the city. Because they are not doing what the expectation is. Because they don't worship other gods. Because they're not doing those things. They're not getting business from the people in Smyrna. So if you grow tomatoes and you go down to the market to sell tomatoes, the people in Smyrna go, we're not buying tomatoes from you because you're not making your blessing to the emperor, so we don't have any idea whether or not the tomatoes you have are blessed or cursed. So we're not going to curse ourselves by buying your unblessed tomatoes. Well, then you can't make a living. You can't survive. You can't figure out. But Jesus says to them, hey, I know that you feel like you're poor, but you're rich. So what should you focus on that? Well, first off is the I know. See, I think sometimes in the world we live in, because of our Western mindset, because of the influence of this American world, because of the stuff we go through, when we have the littlest of things happen to us, our response sometimes is, where is God? Why is God doing this to me? Why is this happening? Why has God forgotten us? Right? Like my favorite one ever was remember a few years ago when Starbucks decided to put something that was not Christian on their coffee cup, and then Christians were like, oh, the sky is falling, it's the apocalypse, quick, bunker down, buy tents and rice, we're not going to survive. Like the foolishness of that. That like when these little things happen, that then immediately it's like, oh, God's forgotten us, and what are we going to do? And I'm so scared, and I'm full of anxiety and fear. What? He knows. Listen, God knows that there's a Christmas tree on Starbucks cups, and let me tell you something, he doesn't care. Does not give a rip what's on that cup. Not one bit. You go, okay, that's fine. You're being trite. But what about like actual things, right? Like what about if I get diagnosed with cancer? What about if my kid overdoses? What about these things that go on? Where's God in the midst of that? Why has he forgotten me there? And what I'm telling you, and what this scripture shows us is he has it and he knows. He knows what you are going through. He knows what you're rubbing up against. He knows the situation you are in. He knows the thing you are facing. And he knows what suffering you are enduring. He has not forgotten you. He has not gone away. He is not separate. He knows. And then he says, you're rich. Well, how are they rich? Well, what God values, obviously, is not what the world values. If you think about it like this, when the world values things, and when we look at what connotates wealth, it's the accumulation of money and currency and then stuff, right? So you're just piling stuff up. Like, look at all my stuff. I got more stuff than you got stuff, and since I've got more stuff than your stuff, I can now tell you the value of your stuff because I have accumulated more stuff than you. I am more special. I have more power, more authority in this world because I own more things. Jesus looks at that and goes, that is insane. That is not what connotates richness and depth. That's not what connotates value and worth. So what connotates value and worth? Him. So when he says to the church, you may feel poor, but you're not, you're rich. Well, why does he say that? Because he knows the suffering of this world is not forever. Jesus suffered. Right? Like anybody that wants to get up and preach health, wealth, gospel and tell you, like, hey, if you just tithe, if you give your 10%, God's going to give it back to you sevenfold, promise. It's an investment service. And you'll never be sick, and you'll never have any pain, no suffering, nothing will ever happen to you. Your life will be perfect. You'll have 2 Cadillacs and a hot wife and a big old house that everybody else is going to want. Praise the Lord, pass some ammunition. Except that's not, like, Christ is our example. Jesus suffered and was rejected the whole time he was here. It literally says he was despised and rejected. And not despised and rejected like how we feel about, oh, I don't know, the music your kid listens to. Like, just the little, like, oh, I don't like that. No, like, despised and rejected to the place that people organized groups and made marches against him to have him killed. That's what we're talking about. That level of frustration and hurt and pain. And then he at one point goes, I don't even have a house. I don't have a place to put my head. I don't know what I'm going to eat. Like I'm suffering here on earth. This world is suffering. But does anybody anywhere think that Jesus was poor? No. Well, why not? Because he's God. So then we have to change our mentality and our mindset about wealth and about poverty. Because if Christ says you're rich and you don't have anything, then what's that mean? Well, first it means that if you have a bunch of stuff, there's no value in it. Which means that you could ease somebody's pain and suffering here on earth if you just give some of your stuff away. You don't need all your stuff. Which for some reason, like, people are like, well, I work for all that. That's my stuff. I got all that. I need all that stuff. No, you don't. You can't even park in your garage because you got so much garbage. The garage is no longer a garage. It's a storage container for your excess stuff. Someday we're going to have to get a dumpster to throw all the stuff away so we can use the garage for the appropriate thing. But until then, we've got all this stuff. Well, help somebody. We got so much money, we got to keep opening accounts so the government won't tax us. We just keep pushing money into these secret accounts all over the place so that the government doesn't take our money. Why? What are you doing with that? Well, I earned it. Right, but if you got people who are apart, who don't have anything, then you could help, right? Like we could say, like, if money and value is not found in the intrinsic thing, then money and value, the value of things is found in your relationship with Jesus and knowing Christ, then these things that he's given you aren't really yours, they're his, and if you can bless somebody else who is without, then you should. But man, that consumerism in all of us, right? You're like, well, is there going to be a committee who are going to determine who we're helping out? And then are we going to hold them accountable to what we're giving them? And I get that. Like, hear me this morning. I'm not like one of those guys like, no, just give it away, God. Like, I get there should be accountability. I get that if you're trying to help somebody out of poverty, you want to help them out of poverty. You just don't want to make that you are the thing that they are worshiping and living off of because you're funding all of their psychosis and brokenness. But in the same right, you also don't want to fall into the land of greed and hoarding because you don't trust that they won't use it in the way you think they should. It's not yours. God gave it to you. Give it away. You ain't taking it with you. Right? I mean, that's weird. Well, here we are. We're burying Grandma Edna this morning. Now, you may wonder why her coffin's so large. And that's because we shoved all our precious moments in there with her because it was very important that she collect all the precious moments. And she actually wrote, when you bury me with the precious moments. So they're going into the ground. Because, like, you wouldn't do that. So then why do we have this thing built into us that we feel like we have? It's mine. It's mine. No, it's not. The other thing is, if you are poor, or if you feel like my life would be better if I had more stuff, or if you feel like this isn't enough, you really need to, in America, stop and examine what it is you're saying because you're probably not poor. You got a place to sleep at night. You got food. Well, it's a lot of hurdles for me to jump through to get that food, but you get it. People all the time will be like, well, we don't know where we're going to eat. And I can go right now and print you off a piece of paper and hand it to you from about 30 different organizations in this city that if you walk in and you go, I don't have food, they will give you food, no questions asked. They'll go, oh, well, here's food. Like, food is not hard to get. So that's not where we're struggling. And the same is true if you can't pay your power bill or your heat bill. I can give you about 30 different people, that vintage included, you can go to and say, hey, we don't know how we're going to make our power bill. Can you help? And the church will vote. They'll vote, yep, and then we'll pay the power bill. Like, you don't live in the type of poverty and the type of brokenness that is this world. Because in this world, in Smyrna, that poverty, the people who were around these Christians, you can go die. I don't care if you die. Go die on the street. You're pagan. You believe a false thing. Jesus isn't God. And if he is, he'd take care of you. If he's not, then learn a lesson. We don't live that way in America. That's not how, like, there's still some intrinsic thing built into how Americans see people, that even if we don't like you, even if we're frustrated with you, even if we think you shouldn't do that, we aren't content to let human beings just die. So we want to give you just enough just to keep you on the vine. Not to write off the vine. You got to stay here in this spot. This is your spot. But that's what we do. All that to say, though, none of this financial fear and worry connotates worth. Worth comes from Jesus. Because we're all going to face judgment for our actions and death. And Christ will circumvent what is owed to you when it says you will die and go to hell. So then if you have value and worth when you're rich, then what he's saying is, because you follow after me, because you have done what I said, because you stood in the face of such incredible persecution, because you have done that, you are rich because I have poured my blessing and anointing in you. I see you. I know what you are going through. The same thing is true for all of us who are in those situations that feel overwhelming. Instead of having moments where we go, where's God in this? What should happen when you face anxiety, adversity, suffering, fear, worry? That should not drive you from the Creator. That should drive you to Him. When creation falls apart, when you see the brokenness of creation, the person that you should go talk to about that is not more creation. You shouldn't run more out into the world and go, this isn't fair, the sky is falling. You should go back to the guy that made it and go, yo, you better help, because I don't know how I'm going to pay my power bill. I don't know how, hello, Jesus. I'm scared. I have anxiety. I'm full of fear and worry. I'm angry. I'm mad at you. I'm frustrated. But you don't want to sever the lines of communication, because the only place that a human being can gain true wealth and true understanding is through a relationship with Jesus Christ. The rest of us is just all foolishness. He goes on to say, so you're facing poverty and you're facing slander, through those that say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. So, Jesus is making friends and influencing people with this one. That word slander is also blasphemy. In the Greek, can be translated either way. The slander that they were facing is this. We know from Roman communications about their court stuff, when there is certain people who have written back a little after this is written, like 125, 135 AD, and they're communicating about persecuting Christians and about the things that are being said about them. We know then from the things that are being said that the guy who wrote it is like, I don't think any of this is true, but here's the things they are facing. So in Smyrna, it's very likely the first one that they were saying about them was they were atheists. Which you may go, how can you be in what? That's crazy. Well, an atheist means, there is no God. But if your whole society and your whole idea of gods are statues sitting in temples someplace, who is Apollo? That guy. There he is right there. I can see him. So that God exists because we cut him out of a stone and we worship the stone. Look at it. There it is. There's Apollo. And then the emperor, how do we know where's he at? He's over there. He's standing there and he's eating a donut. That's the emperor. We worship the emperor. So when they say you worship Yahweh, they go, where is Yahweh? Well, the Bible says you'll have no graven images. So there's nothing they can point to and say that God is everywhere. There is one God. He is triune. He is the God the Spirit, God the Father, and God the Son. But there is no defined thing of him. They go, well, then you're an atheist. And atheism in Roman culture is punishable by death. So, first they're atheists. The next one that they would put out a lot was they were cannibals. Because of communion, which is hilarious. But they would say, you're drinking the blood and eating the flesh of Jesus. That's cannibalism. And then when they would go, no, that's not what I know that's what it says, but it's An analogy, what Jesus is saying, my blood and my body were broken and shed for you, so then when you take this, remember my blood, remember my body. This is what is being thought. They're not actually eating human flesh, but they're just a slander. So cannibalism, Roman culture, punishable by death. The last one, which is real interesting, is they were they argued that they were a sex cult, and they were having orgies with children. Now you may go, what? How in the... Huh? Christians are super uptight about sexuality. How do we get there? Well, what they would do is they would call communion the early church would refer to communion as a love meeting. Because it's a meeting of you with the God who created you and an expression of the love he has for you. So here's what happened. I can guarantee. I don't have this, but I like to make stuff up. So here's what I think. I think somewhere, some pastor thought he was being tricky. Thought he was like, this is gonna resonate. They're gonna love this. We're gonna call it love meeting. We're gonna say, this is where God exposes his love to you. He shows his love. His love comes forth from the cross, and we remember. And so every time you take communion, you remember how much God loves you, and you take that love and you put it inside of you, and then you take that love out into the world. And the world outside with, are you doing that with kids? Well, yeah, everybody takes communion, right? If you're a believer, young, old, that's how communion works. And then they went out and they said, well, they're a sex cult. They're doing all kinds of weird things behind those closed doors. So sex cults with children in the Roman Empire, punishable by death. So we got a 3-pass trifecta here, that then they are trying to punish these people unto death. And who's doing that? It's not the Romans, it's the Jews. The loving, chosen people of God are doing this. Which is why then Jesus says, they think they're Jews, but they're not. They're a synagogue of Satan. You see, sometimes that you will have people say that the Jews are still God's chosen people. The Jews are special. The Jews are this. The Jews are that. No. What makes you a true Jew? Write that down. What makes you a true Jew is not your bloodline. It's not where you were born. It's not what laws or rules you keep. It's not what you know. What makes you a true Jew is, do you believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and are you then grafted into his church? Well, how do we know that? Well, Romans 2, 28, 29. Here's what Paul wrote. No one is a Jew who is one outwardly. That seems pretty emphatic. Just because you're a Jew on the outside, that doesn't mean you are. Nor is circumcision outward and physical. So the physical act of circumcision does not, in fact, make you a Jew. But a Jew is one inwardly. And circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. This praise is not from man, but from God. So Paul's saying, what makes you Jewish, what makes you chosen, what makes you a part of God's called kingdom is, have you taken your will and submitted it to God? Have you allowed your free will to be circumcised by the Father? To have the things you think you should be able to do, not do them and remove them, so that you can somehow know Jesus and obtain the resurrection of the dead. He further illustrates this in Romans chapter 11, where he talks about that there's an olive branch, and he's talking an olive plant, and he's talking about this is the Jewish people, and some of the parts of the plant have died and fallen off, and they've been removed. And so in that place, the person who tends to the olive branch, which is God, has grafted in wild olive branches, the Gentiles, you and me, and then that makes that the new olive. That's the plant. That's Jewish. That's what is important. Well, guess what? It's not about whether you're born an Israelite. No. If you come out of the line of Abraham, now it's about, do you believe as Christ taught? And that's what will offer you salvation. That's what will save you. And that's why he then goes as far to say, these people then who are claiming Jewish, who are claiming that they know the law, they're right, you're wrong, they're nothing more than a synagogue of Satan. This is a radical move from Genesis, Exodus to the end of this thing. Jesus is writing this. He's saying, look, they've had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to receive me as their Messiah, and they have rejected me over and over and over. And now they are persecuting my hands, my feet, my voice in society. So now they are working for the devil. That's Satan's church. Well, you can imagine then how that's probably not going to go over real well in Smyrna. Which is why he writes, do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil's about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. For 10 days you're going to have tribulation, but be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Well, don't fear what you're about to suffer. Isn't that's a little bitty sentence in there, but that is a lot to say to somebody. Hey, we're going to cut off your feet. Cool. Right? Like, that's crazy. That's insane to think about. But when you read about the early church, that is kind of how they approach things. Denounce your God or we're feeding you to lions. Make sure they're hungry. What? Well, I'll go to the lions before I'll denounce God. God is the holder to death, hell, and the grave. He has the keys to the kingdom. My place is not of this world. I'm just passing through. So if you're just going to expedite my going home to him and that's going to go via lion, then via lion we shall go. I mean, it's crazy talk when you put it into the context of how we think in our finite brains. But if you really believe that God came, died, and resurrected for the forgiveness of sins, and the only way to circumvent death and eternal judgment is to follow after him, then you can see how there is nothing that's going to lead me away from that. You become emphatic about your belief, and you stop caring what other people are going to say and do, which leads you then to get a letter that says, don't fear what you're about to suffer. There's also the implication of what? I know. I know what you're going through. I know what you're going to face, and I haven't left you. I'm not gone anywhere. I am here. Which is why when we go back to the beginning, when he opens the letter, what does he say? I am the first, I am the last. Although I was dead, I live. Well, what's he saying? I am at the beginning, and I am at the end, and I am everywhere in between. And everything that happens in history, every moment that you walk through, everything that you face and you go through, I ordered that. I am sovereign over history and over creation, and I have not left you. I have not forsaken you. I stand beside you. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. That's what he is saying. So when you face suffering, when you face hurt, persecution, pain, when things don't go the way you think they should go, when you feel that anxiety, you need to remind yourself of that Jesus said, I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. I am the beginning. I am the end. I have not left you. I have not forsaken you. And in these moments where you are suffering, even more so, I am standing directly beside you. This is why you are rich in spirit, because the God of the universe, the creator of all that is broken in this world now, stands alongside you and says, I am with you. I know what you are facing. I know what you are going through. I've not left you. I've not put you out on an island to suffer in this world. You're going to face suffering, but it's only going to last for 10 days. Now, I know the literists are like, I wonder what those 10 days were in Smyrna. Let us pore over the history documents. Except, this is an apocalyptic book, and apocalyptic books like to play with numbers. So, when the number 10 is used, it means a short, perfect amount of time. So it doesn't necessarily mean it was 10 actual days. It just means your suffering is finite. And that should be liberating for a lot of us. Right? It's only going to happen for this amount of time. Jay, my little boy, in this building, climbed upon a chair, flung himself at PVC pipes to swing like an Olympic idiot. Let go mid-swing because he couldn't hold his own body weight, crashed to the floor, and broke both wrists. And so we've gone through surgeries and we've done all the fun things that you get to do. So the first time we go in, he's got his little cast on, he's got his little stitches where they put the pins in. And the nurse comes in and goes, okay, honey, we're going to take out the stitches. And you can see the color draining out of Jay's face. And he looks at me and he goes, Dad, is it going to hurt? And I go, only for a little bit. And he goes, no, for real. Like, is it? I'm like, I don't know. It didn't hurt when they took my stitches out for my appendix. Jay just feels weird, but it might hold, but it's going to be better once it's out. You can't leave it in there. And he clenches his little hands and closes his eyes, and he goes, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. But that's such a great example, I think, for some of us when we face down things that feel overwhelming. Because if you really believe that God has overcome death, hell, and the grave, and there's nothing that you're going to face in this world that is not ordered by Him, that is not eventually going to lead you home to Him, then in those moments when bad news comes, in those moments when you have anxiety and fear, when you look, I don't know how I'm going to get through this, our approach as Christians should be, I can stand in the fire. I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. And if you're not walking through it and you're a brother and sister in the Lord, then you should be alongside that person going, you can do it. You're not ever going to be alone, not going to be by yourself. The church will be here with you. We're going to love you, pray for you, hold your hand, help you find your new normal, be along for the ride with you. And you're going to suffer. This world's suffering, but you're not alone. So you can stand in the gap of that, and you can do that. We can face it down. And if we do that, then Jesus gives us two examples of what you're going to get. Hey, if you can do it, if you can stand through, if you cannot compromise on your faith, if you can not walk away, if you can continue to love and serve me, then He says this, I'll give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. What's the second death? Revelations 20:13-15 says, and the sea gave up the dead who were in it. That's fun. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So when Jesus said, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says, the one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death, what he's saying is the judgment that you deserve, the thing that is going to happen to all human beings, alive and dead at the end of time, when God stands before broken creation and holds it accountable, the thing it does, when He looks upon you, you won't face the punishment of the second death because Christ has already taken that punishment on you. On Him. He took it on Himself so that you don't have to. So if you can suffer a little bit here on earth, if you can go through poverty, you can go through physical pain, you can go through your kids letting you down, you can go through relationships breaking, you can face all the stuff of this broken world. If you can hold the line in the middle of that storm and in that battle and that mess, that when we hit the end of time and God looks at your life, He's not going to judge you, He's going to judge His Son, who gave His life so that you could live. Which gives us all what? Hope. And hope is dangerous. Because hope makes people do things like, you're going to feed me to the lions? Make sure they're real hungry. Well, why would you say that? Because you got hope. There ain't anything you're going to make me face or make me walk through in this world. There's nothing you can throw at me that is not going to drive me closer to the Creator who made me. So as we draw to a close today and we think about the church in Smyrna, what do you take from it? Well, you take this. We need to focus on Jesus and not be driven out away from Him when we face hard times. That's the first thing. The next thing is, you better be thanking Jesus. We don't face persecution like this. There is not persecution in America for anyone like this. Any moron can get on any voice of anything and say whatever stupid thing they want to say, and there's little repercussion for it. Oh, you might, someone may go, oh, I don't like that. And then somebody else, I don't like that either. Oh, he's evil and mean. Okay, he's still eating cheeseburgers and sitting at home and not caring what you think. We don't have, groups of people that show up at that guy's house and drag him out in the street and nail him to a pole and set him on fire. We're not like Russia in the time of Stalin, who killed 50 million Christians. In the total number of accounted martyrdom that we know of, if you count all the numbers, 70 million people have died for the cause of the cross. 50 million of them died under Stalin. The church is still in Russia. To this day, there's still a Russian church. Can you imagine? 50, you can't even process that. 50 million people disappeared, gone because of their belief. So the next time you want to wake up and read something on Facebook, or you want to go, oh, this world's going to hell in a handbasket. Look at this is awful. Look at, oh my Lord, look what they're doing in California. Oh, it's terrible. Shut up. Just shut up. We are not facing the same thing. We are not walking down the same thing. We are a blessed nation where we can worship and say and think and reason what we want. And you can go out of these doors every day and you can logically convey Christ to whoever you want, whenever you want, however you want. You should be doing that. Because what we learned this morning is a lot of people are going to suffer. A lot of people are going to have pain and hurt. And we have the answer. What's the answer? Though you're poor, you are rich. Why are you rich? Because Jesus Christ loved his church and loved these people so much, he saw fit to give his life so that we can live. Let's be a church that does not live in fear of the next ball that's going to drop, but instead be a church that constantly raises up Christ in the sea and in the storm so that people can see there is hope in situations that feel hopeless. Let's be that church. Let's pray. Lord, I come to you this morning. I lift up everybody in this room. Lord, first and foremost, I pray for people who are walking through dark times. Lord, I pray that nothing that was said today would make them feel like it's being trivialized or trite. Suffering is a real thing. It's a thing that draws our attention to just that thing. And so, Lord, in the midst of that, I pray you would supernaturally give them clarity on how to approach what it is they're going through. Your Bible, this letter teaches us that in the sea and in the mess of that storm, you stand next to us as close as possible, and that we're rich in your spirit because we're facing tribulation and trial. And so, Lord, I pray that would be true for people this morning who are lost in suffering and pain. Reveal your love, reveal your power, reveal your authority, reveal yourself to them so they might have something to lean upon. For the rest of us in this room, Lord, for the Christians in this room, I pray for compassion and empathy for those who are in pain and suffering, for those who are poor. Lord, let us make our value, Lord, to be found solely in you and not the things that we've accumulated. Don't make us hoarders and consumerists, Lord. Make us Christian theists who are followers of you. Lord, give us avenues and means and creative ways to help people. Help us put things into place that can reach those who are lost and broken. And last but not least, I pray for every person in this room, Lord, that you would give us hope and peace in the sea and in the storm. That you would help us say no matter what we go through or where we go, what we see, what we do, that you are with us and we are content in spite of our current situation. Nothing is forever, and we'll grit our fists and we'll face this down and say we can do it, we can do it. We believe in your power, we believe in your death and resurrection, and we don't fear death. Instead, we cling to the hope that we will see you and be with you and be with those we love again, face to face in eternity. Help us to be that church. In your name we pray. Amen.